Hello, everyone. This is Brad Graber. I'm your author for this evening. Welcome to the Renee's Reading Club tonight. Thank you, Renee, so much for having me. I hope everyone can see and hear me. I'm going to scan down. Yes. Great. I can see people are beginning to sign on and saying hello. Um, I'm very grateful for this opportunity. I want to thank Sandy Faber for alerting me to Renee's Reading Club. I appreciate it. And I've actually started to take some of the book recommendations that I see from the group. So I really, really appreciate being part of it and being able to share tonight a little bit about my latest novel, which is Boca by Moonlight. And this is a book that I'm really excited about. It's my fourth novel, if you will, my fourth book, my third novel. I have another book of essays, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But Boca by Moonlight is very close to my heart. And for folks who um, are from Florida tonight, hello, hello. I hope somebody's from Boca. I myself grew up in New York City, so I have a lot of experience with Boca Raton. Of course, that's what Boca stands for. And it's a great story, I think. It's doing quite well on Amazon already. I noticed it's got about 42 reviews, 4.4 stars, and on Goodreads it's doing about 4.3 stars out of 5. So I'm very excited about that. Um, I also was going to say that um, this is a real thrill for me to be able to be with all of you tonight, especially since I see that the AV is working. That is even more exciting than I can tell you. You know, you have dreams in your life about the AV not working. So I'm glad that that's all live and good. So let me tell you a little bit about Boca by Moonlight and a little bit about myself. And then I'm going to scan down periodically to look at questions. So feel free to just put your comments or questions below in the chat. Um, so for me, Boca by Moonlight is a real story of love, friendship, and finding yourself. I write about love, life, and relationships. Those are what my books tend to be about. And so Boca by Moonlight is really a great opportunity for me to really address some of the issues that I think we see in the world when it comes to men. So Boca by Moonlight is the story of George, who's a widower, who's really been married 38 years. And in my family, unfortunately, the men tend to outlive the women. And so, yes, we bury them all. And they tend to die fairly young. And so what happens is the core of the family is sort of shaken. So in Boca by Moonlight, I'm really exploring the story of George, who's been married about 38 years, whose wife has died of cancer, left him with a lot of medical bills, and now George is living on the grounds of the Boca Raton Hotel and Country Club, which is kind of beyond his means. He would have been fine had his wife lived, but unfortunately, with cancer and how expensive the last 2 years of her life are, the bills have just racked up, and George is now a little bit on the ropes financially. Well, George struggles because, as all men do who are lost after their wives die, he struggles with his friendships, with his relationships. He's not really sure about what's going on in his life. He's really kind of lost without that female anchor. And George has spent most of his life building a career, and now suddenly he's on his own. George has three really good friends who he plays golf with, and he thinks that they're all close until about 6 months later, one of those friends dies. And so they wind up at the funeral, George and his other two friends, Herbie, who is his former ex-brother-in-law, who's been married 4 times, and his other friend, Benny, who's really a sports advocate. And Benny's all about sports and keeping score and games and all that. And so George finds himself with these three friends, and suddenly the rabbi at the mortuary calls them into the back area to explain that the family hasn't shown for the funeral for their friend, and the check to the mortuary is bounced. And suddenly George and his friends have to chip in, and they have to pay for the funeral, which kicks off our story. So it's really an internal and an external story. The internal plot is about George struggling to find himself, struggling to understand whether his friendships are real. Does he really know the man he's with? And the other part of the story is the external story. How are they going to get reimbursed? Because remember, George is on the ropes financially. And so George really needs to cover that burial expense, and he's beginning to live on all of his credit cards. So Boca by Moonlight is really kind of raises the question, do men really have friendships? Do they ever listen? Because you'll see as you read through it, a lot of what's going on with these men is as they go on a journey to try to get reimbursed, they begin to discover that they really don't know a lot about each other. And that's kind of the surprise, because these are guys who are friends 20 years and play golf. But as most men do, they're involved in an activity as opposed to actually sharing how they feel. And so it's kind of that kind of a book. Now, I just recently was reviewed by Reader's Favorite, and the reviewer said, and I was really happy to see this, she said this is kind of like the Golden Girls, but for men. And it's so relatable because it really is the kind of issues that men struggle with on their own, if you will, in the dating world, in the world in general. And George has two adult children that he's struggling to communicate with. He always thought that it was a close family, but there are some secrets in the family as well. And so Boca by Moonlight is really kind of that relatable story about a man struggling to find his way, struggling to find friendship, and really becoming more alert, if you will, to the importance of family. And so why did I write this book? Well, as you might guess by this point, as I mentioned, all the men in my family outlived the women. And so my dad moved to Boca Raton when he turned 60. And it was really a great experience for him, if you will, because my dad, he was still able to drive at night. And when you can drive at night in Boca Raton, you are a hot commodity. And suddenly my dad found himself very much, there was a lot of interest in him. And the women in Boca Raton, they love men who are 6 feet as long as it's above ground. And my dad was above ground. So with that, that gives you a little background on how I thought about writing the story and writing the book. Again, I've been really thrilled by the reviews. There's a review from Reads Discovery that gave it a 5-star must-read. And the book has just been accepted by the Jewish Book Council, 2022 Jewish Book Council, as one of their selections. So I'm just thrilled with that opportunity. And I'll be going out and hopefully doing some speaking about the novel and about the stories we tell ourselves and how we can change our plot, our arc, our point of view in life if we just do a little more editing. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about that as well. I know that I didn't really share a lot about myself, and let me just tell you, I am born and raised from New York City, but I've lived in a lot of different places. I have trouble making friends. No, that isn't true. I'm kidding. But I lived in Chicago. I've lived in Detroit, which, by the way, if you don't know Detroit, I loved it. Detroit's one of my favorite places. I love Chicago, too. I've lived in San Francisco, the Bay Area, actually Mill Valley. I live there. And I'm currently coming to you live tonight from Phoenix, Arizona. So I've been quite around the country. I've gone to my master's at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, and I did my undergrad at SUNY at Buffalo. So maybe some of you out there are Buffalo folks or maybe Chicago folks. I'm hoping so. So that's a little bit about me. And then I have to quickly look at the clock to make sure I'm still on time. Um, and I'm going to scan down now and look and see if there are any questions. So Renee asks, was the story based on any people you know? Well, a little bit. It really, the characters are unique and different, but I will say that it did come a lot from my dad's social circle. Um, they were the kind of folks that I had met, and I didn't mention the two other characters. One is Eleanor. She's a widow, and that's part of George's dating experience. And there are a few others that pop up that are part of the book. And then there's really Sylvia, and she's the realtor. And so Sylvia's kind of she knows the whole game going on in Boca Raton. And if you're familiar with Boca Raton, a lot of the scenes happen at, where else? The deli. So they're going to be at 2J's quite a bit. They'll be at Flakowitz. They spend a lot of time in Meisner Park, if you're familiar with that. And Town Center, Cheesecake Factory, come on now. So you'll see a lot of that in the book as well. I see that talk about your career. What drew you into writing? I've always wanted to be a writer. I'm formerly a healthcare administrator. Yes, I am. I did that for quite a few years. Worked in a lot of large healthcare companies in management. So I always loved that, and I always did a lot of speaking and presentations, but I've always wanted to write. I'm interested in what makes us tick, how we make our decisions in life. My first book, which was The Intersect, and I'll just hold that up really quickly. The Intersect is my first book, and it was my debut novel, and it's really about different people coming together, showing up at the right time at the right place. It's a book that is close to my heart because it tells the story of Daisy, who she breaks a hip, she's in her 70s, and her family sells her home when she's in rehab, and they think she's not going to make it. And a gay couple winds up buying it, and when Daisy's let out of rehab, she shows up at their door, knocks on the door, and one of the gentlemen thinks that she's his partner's long-lost aunt, welcomes her into the guest room. So the story is very much about the families we choose, and that The Intersect has really done quite well too. It's got wonderful reviews, so that's very exciting for me as well. I also write, I should tell you, a humor blog, and that humor blog has about 2,700 subscribers. So if you are interested in what I'm presenting this evening, I would love for you to go on brad@bradgraber.com and sign up for my humor blog. I sent out one last week, which was and they're kind of like Irma Bombeck, if you will, kind of meets Larry David, if you will. So that's kind of what I write. I write very off the wall kind of ones. But last week I wrote a one about COVID. Would COVID be a good name for your dog? And I sort of imagined a toy poodle named COVID, or maybe a chow. But that's kind of what I write about. Recently I wrote one about Mahjong, which I think is a real game of champions. And so when you think about it, most men haven't played Mahjong. I tried, and I failed. I thought it was very hard. And I remember growing up in New York, my mom would play Mahjong. She'd smoke, she'd drink, they would talk, and all I could do playing it was stare at the card. So those are the kinds of things I write about on the humor blog. I try to keep it light. It's always kind of funny. And I also do a lot of giveaways and promotions. So if you're interested, I'd really love you to sign up for that. It's called There I Said It. That's the name of the blog. I had to think about that. What's the name of that darn blog? But it goes out every 2 weeks. It's really kind of fun. It's very enjoyable. Loved Moonlight in Boca. Relationships reminded me of Sunshine Boys. Best of luck with it. Thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I think it's got a lot of flavor of that kind of humor. And, I'm certainly a big fan of Neil Simon. I love Neil Simon. So if you love Neil Simon and you like the Golden Girls, this is kind of the stuff that I'm really writing. I see somebody's from Highland Beach. Hey, how are you, Michelle? And you're also from New York City. Great, great, terrific. And I see Parkland is here, originally from Queens, New York. That's Amy. Amy, I am from Queens, New York. Can you hear an accent at all? I'm from Agala Gardens, which is at 73rd Avenue, pretty close to that area in Fresh Meadows, if you will. We called it Flushing. Um, what else do I have going on here? Thank you. Book is great. I appreciate it. People liked The Intersect. So I talked about Boca by Moonlight a little bit, but I really want to also share with you that I have another book on essays. This is 70 of my favorite essays from my blog. It's called What's That Growing in My Sour Cream? Um, yes, it is. It's a kind of an odd title, but it's a humor book, if you will, and it really encapsulates most of my best of my blogs, I think. And let's see, what other kinds of questions do we have? So yeah, it's great when you get reviews as an author. Sandy had asked me to talk a little bit about that. You never really know. And even like tonight, we're sitting here, I'm in my home office, I can't see you. I really, it's hard as a writer, especially when you're kind of introverted. You don't really get the feedback directly from readers, and I've been kind of lucky about that. People send me notes, but reviews are so important for a book to move along the Amazon shopping list, if you will. So the more reviews that you get on books and the more you take the time to do that, it's really kind of helpful. It's also great when you guys talk about a book, like in Renee's Reading Club. That's really terrifically helpful. I read The Lincoln Highway basically because I've been part of your group for, I think, about 2 months now. And so I saw all the comments about Lincoln Highway, and I wanted to make sure that I read it as well. And now, I'm a fan, and I'm going to go ahead and buy the other books as well. So it's really kind of helpful to get reviews, to get a chance to participate with a larger group of people talking about books. It sort of breaks you out of your home office mentality. And for a lot of writers, we're so introverted. It may seem like I'm bubbly and happy now, but when we get off this call, I will be hiding under the desk for the next 2 hours. So just to recover. But being introverted, it really is something, it's great to be a world builder. And I grew up in a family, and I should tell you a little bit about my family. If you go on my website, at bradgraber.com, you will see that I write novels basically because I grew up in a family where no one really listened to me. They were all busy talking, and it was a very loud Jewish family with a lot of opinions, and everybody was always sort of busy, and I'm kind of a quiet guy. So they sort of talked over and past me. So this gave me a chance to really create worlds for myself. And my mom was a very social lady. And so I grew up in a 2-building complex, a co-op in New York City, with 8 floors in each building, 22 apartments on each floor. And when you grow up in that kind of environment, everybody sort of knows you. And if you're from New York, I think you kind of know what I'm saying. And so when I would come home from school, there'd be a group of people sitting on the front steps of the stoop, and they'd be saying, "Brad, how's your grandmother? Brad, how's your mom feeling today? We didn't see her go to work." Whatever. It was just a lot of interaction. And also, it was a lot of stories. And so you really begin to learn and hear about how people tell stories, because when you ride in an elevator that takes 2 minutes to go up and down from the first floor to the eighth floor, people learn to tell stories in very quick bites. And, they always tell you the most interesting bits just when they get on the elevator and just before they get off. So as a writer, that really is something that becomes very helpful. It helps you learn how to keep your audience interested. So I'm scanning down to look at some of the other comments. Renee, was it hard to get your first book published? Yes, Renee, it was very hard. And I should talk about that. It's very hard for authors to get published, and it's very hard for authors to be found. So I'm a relatively new author. You've seen that I've got 4 books out right now, but it's hard to find your audience. There are 4,500 books published a day just through Kindle, Amazon Kindle, and that's an awful lot of competition for authors to be able to cut their way through the noise. So being able for someone like me to talk to a larger group like this is just, it's really heaven sent. I do podcasts. I do those as well. I do a lot of speaking engagements as well, and I find that that's helpful. I'm hoping that the Jewish Book Council is really going to help me get into temples and Hadassah and all of those groups, because you really have to be a Jewish Book Council member to be able to get through to some of those organizations. So I'm really very excited about that. Loved Boca by Moonlight. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Jeff Brandenburg says, what did you learn about yourself when writing the book? Well, I think what I learned, and that's a good question, is about, I mentioned before, shifting your point of view. And so, in my family, the men are fairly helpless. They really are. And I think that it really gave me a sense of empathy for, how these men have managed to arrive at such an advanced age in life and still not know how to maneuver through relationships, how to communicate with their children. Now, I know that there are some great dads out there, and believe me, I know that there's some great men who have wonderful relationships with their children. But I also know that there are some men who, they move on. They might have a first family, and then once they have a second family, they forget about the first family. It gave me a lot of empathy because, my dad was very much in love with my mother, and my mother died young. She died at 58. And I think my dad struggled with his children. He would look at his children, and he would feel a lot of pain. It was a painful experience for him. His children were reminders of his wife and that she had died. And he was very angry that my mom died. And certainly my mom did not want to leave at 58, but my dad really struggled with that. So I think I learned a lot about how men tend to cope. And I think the other thing, too, that I really learned from writing the book, there's a theme in the book about asking the next question. And I think men really don't do this very well. Women are far better. But sometimes men will put something out in the universe. They'll put out a care, a concern, a worry, and their friends don't always bite on it. They think, well, that's too intimate, or I don't want to talk about that, or that's uncomfortable. And so a woman might bite on it. They might ask the next question. And a lot of men don't do that, which is why if you go to a business meeting, and I've had this experience, men will never ask you a question. They will talk about themselves, they might talk about their lives, but they never ask each other questions. That isn't how men communicate. So it's one of the things that men need to learn, and I think men who have better relationships, who have closer friends, tend to do that. And so that's always a helpful thing to learn, and it's certainly something that was clarified for me in the book. Do I find the process of writing challenging? I love it. To me, writing feels like it's a spiritual activity. I get lost in myself. I feel very much as if I'm connecting with energy that's all around me. Sometimes I look at the books I write and I think, how did I come up with this? How did I get to the end of it? But I'm a pantser. If you've heard of that expression, there are plotters and pantsers. There are writers who lay out their work in very specific detail, and then there are other people who are sort of doing it by the seat of their pants. I do a mixture of both. I do plot as I'm doing the writing. I keep it to the side so I can follow the story along. But I really generally go where I think the story needs to go. That's how I write. I love being a writer. I love being in my own head. I spend a lot of time there. And that's where most of my characters are. And the other thing I should say, too, for me at least, there's always a seed of truth in my books. So whenever you read an author, and I love this point, you should be thinking about what's the seed of truth in the book. So I told you tonight about Boca by Moonlight, and I told you a little bit about my dad. It isn't my dad's story. It's not my story. But the seed of truth is about a widower who's kind of lost and really is disconnected from his adult children and friends, and how he goes on a journey to try to find that connection, and how those friends help him through the process. And so that's a little bit of the seed of truth, if you will. But my other book, and I'm going to hold up my second novel, it was called After the Fall. It's a story of a young girl being raised in Queens, New York, and she is being raised by her grandmother, and she can't remember her mom at all. And so she's going to go on a journey to try to figure out why she can't remember her mother, because her grandmother refuses to talk about the past. So there's a seed of truth in that book as well, from my past life, about a distant niece who came to me to find out a story about her uncle. And it reminded me, when I connected with that story, I realized that there are a lot of people that may not know their family members, and so sometimes they have to go past their parents to reach out to really some stranger to find out their story. So that's kind of always an interesting angle. So I'm always looking for those kinds of things. Do I do in-person events? Renee asks. Yes, I do. I've done book parties where I've come in and actually brought 40 books and asked somebody in the market who's living in a specific market to invite 40 of their friends in. We give them a book at a discount, and we also provide all the food and all the the wine, the snacks, and we do a quick, for an hour or two, talk about the book. We sell the book, and we just have fun together. So that's really a great thing to do. We call those book parties. I also do book clubs. I've done quite a few of those across the country, where I've been able to come in and a group has read the book ahead of time, and we've discussed the books. So I've been very lucky. People have been very receptive. So yes, I do those live events, and I also do speaking for different groups. So I've been able to do that as well. But I'm always available for that. And boy, I hope if you're looking for a speaker, or you're looking for a book party, you want to do a book club, I'm certainly here. I can do it by Zoom, or I could do it any way you'd like. When you start writing a book and have the premise, do you already know how you want the book to end, or does it evolve or change as the process goes on? It does sort of change. I'm not always sure how the book is going to end, and sometimes it takes me a bit of time to really think it through, how the book is going to end. And I always know the beginning. I usually know the middle. It's sometimes the end that I want to tie up. So here's a little thing that I use as a measure for whether I know if a book is good or not. I have to cry in the last chapter. If I haven't cried a little bit in the last chapter, and I don't mean cried because the book is over, I mean something has touched me. And that's my measure of whether I think the book has ended properly. I want to be touched somehow, and that's really kind of important to me that the book sort of hits a chord. So I don't know how you all feel when you read, but that's kind of something that I really like. Um, yes, I'm working on a fifth book. Thank you for asking that question. I am working on a fifth book. It is currently under wraps right now. It's going to be maybe a follow up to one of my books. I haven't thought yet whether I'm going to keep the characters together, but I want to write about. Oh, well, well, here's the story. I'll give you a quick snapshot of it. First of all, you can tell my characters are in their 60s. Now, I don't know when the last time was that you read a book about baby boomers in their 60s or 50s. You know, that's generally what my main characters are. They're in that age category. And that's what I like to write about. And you may not know, but I'm Jewish. And so they have a little Jewish flair to them as well. So I want to write my next book about a retirement community. And it's right next door to a bar that plays loud music. And I want to get all those characters together. The problem is going to be, of course, the loud music at night. And I live in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona, and near us is Tempe, where Arizona State University is. And so currently, I was reading in the paper about one of these fabulous upscale retirement communities that it's part of Arizona State University. And the problem they're having with nearby bars and the kids making too much noise. And I thought, oh, that's just heaven sent. I love that concept. So that's something that I'm kind of excited to explore. So I'm going to be looking at that kind of book. What do I love to read? I read really a lot of different things. I love Edith Wharton because I love The Gilded Age. So I've read Age of Innocence and all of those books. I love Ayn Rand. Her book, We the Living, is about the Russian Revolution. That's one of my favorite books. I'm a big Kenneth Follett guy. The Winter, what is that? Something Winter, the end of Winter, Winter Wars, about World War II. I love that one. And as I just mentioned, I just finished reading The Lincoln Highway. I also am currently reading Anne Gavin's, and this is a tough title for me to remember. It's something like I Love You Better When You're Not Here. So I've been reading a whole lot of different books. I just recently read Madam, which is the story of Polly Adler, who was one of the most famous madams in New York City in the 1930s and 40s. So I was kind of interested in her story. So I read a broad array of books. I read Little Fires Everywhere, which I'm sure you guys have all read. So I'm just always so interested in everything. How long did it take you to write your last book? Good question. Well, first book took me 3 years, and that was really painful. I actually rewrote it 3 times each year. The second book, After the Fall, took me a year and a half, that was a reasonable do. I think Boca by Moonlight has taken me about a year and a half to do. So that was great. And my essay book was easy because I was able to pull together 3 years, the best of 3 years of my last set of essays. So that really worked out quite well for me. So that was always, that was great. Sandy's asking me, who's my favorite author? Sandy, I really don't have one. I think anyone who's out there writing is just terrific, and I'm a big fan and admirer of a lot of writers. There are a lot of things that I love, and so that kind of makes it easy for me. But I'll tell you, I really love, and he's not in fashion now, but I loved the Tale of the Cities books. Those books really were wonderful. I just love the way they were written. They're easy reads. That's Armistead Maupin. Just very easy reads, and I always enjoyed those. And again, I think I had a very busy career. My first career as a healthcare administrator, so it was always hard, to get into a book. So I needed to have something that was easy to kind of pick up and read. And I hope that I'm bringing that to the table as well, that the books are fun, they're informative, they make you laugh, but they're also serious and readable. And you better cry at the end. That's what I want. So that's kind of what I look for as I'm reading a book as well. Um, yeah, it is true about asking about your favorite book. It's like asking um, who's your favorite child. I see a comment here about dogs. Yes, I always have a dog in my book. I'm a big dog lover, and I wrote Boca by Moonlight with my last dog sitting by my side. He was a poodle, and he's no longer with me. But you'll notice that in Boca by Moonlight, um, George adopts a little toy poodle, and that is poodle's name is Miss Betsy. My poodle's name was Charlie. He was a miniature. But I think a dog really gives a character the ability to express another side of their personality, if you will. And so, especially for men, men are able somehow to show love and attention and caring and nurturing for a dog that they may not show to the rest of the world. And so I think it's kind of important. I love dogs. I always want to have a dog in a book. I miss having a dog, and so I think it's important to have that there. I'm a big animal lover with that. I should tell you also the other thing about me is because I'm no longer working in healthcare, I'm still very active in nonprofits, and so I actually volunteer at an organization in Phoenix where I actually drive seniors to doctors' appointments, and I've taken for the last 6 years blind seniors shopping or for groceries. So those are some of the kinds of things that I do that also I think informs the fiction that I write. It's always wonderful because I love older people. I'm certainly an older person myself, but I love seniors. I love what they have to say. I love when they share about their lives. And it's so wonderful now that we're all baby boomers and we're all at the point now where we have a lot of maturity behind us, a lot of life experience. And I think that's so rich. And for baby boomers, I think it's so important that we have things that reflect our lives. I mean, even though I read a lot about other, Generation Z, Y, all of that, I think baby boomers also are an important market, and we need to see our lives reflected in literature as well. So I'm pretty committed to doing that as well. I just love that. The other things that I might tell you about me, um, I think I've told you a lot, but I didn't tell you a little bit about the humor. So I'm also have done Arizona Storytellers. So if you're familiar with Arizona Storytellers, that's where you get up in front of 400 people and you tell a story for 10 minutes. It's extemporaneous and it's a story that has to do with the topic of the evening. And so I've done that. And the reason why I bring that up is because one of the characters in Boca by Moonlight um, always is referencing his grandmother. And his grandmother had a lot of wisdom. And so some of the things that I was raised with, I had a grandmother who used to say, "You're born with the face God gives you. You wind up with the face you deserve." And those are the kinds of funny things that my grandmother used to say, like, if the cat pees, don't cross your eyes because they'll stay crossed. And so in my book, I've tried to pepper, and I usually do try to pepper all of the novel with a lot of wisdom and a lot of the sayings and funny things that come from our families. I like to include a lot of that in there. am I going to get another dog to keep you company while you write the next book? Well, I'm not quite sure because I really, like everybody else, want to do a little traveling now that COVID seems to be just a bit on the wane. So I'm not quite sure if I'm going to get another dog. I'm thinking about it. Um, I'd like to do it, probably adopt a dog. Somebody who's some dog that's hopefully house trained. That would be nice. We have friends who have puppies now, and that looks like that's quite a bit. Um, and let's see, is there anything else anyone? Oh, how long did you do healthcare administration? I did it 32 years. So I worked in nonprofit a long time. I worked for primarily Catholic healthcare. Um, I did. I worked in Detroit at the Detroit Medical Center, if you're familiar with Detroit, and then I worked for Trinity Health. I've worked at Providence Hospital. In Chicago, I worked at Highland Park Hospital. So I've been really working in a lot of different organizations. And when I moved to Phoenix, I worked for a for-profit for a year and a half, and I didn't really care for that. So I decided to not do that anymore. So I really am kind of a not-for-profit kind of guy. I believe in quality patient care and making sure that the patient comes first. That's what I'm all about. Let's see. What other questions do we have here? You would love my elevators. 15 floors is a lot of stories. Stacy says, yes, I would love 15 floors. I bet you hear a lot of stories. You know, it's funny because now that I'm out of New York City, and I've been out of New York City for years and years and years, I'm really kind of concerned about getting in an elevator. When I lived in the Bay Area, especially because they have earthquakes there, growing up in New York, elevators do get stuck. And so in New York City, though, when you're living in a co-op building, somebody's usually always around to unstick the elevator, if you will. But other than that, I'm kind of like nervous about elevators. They are not to be avoided at all costs. But anyway, are there any more questions for me? Anything else that is comes to mind that anybody would like to know? Well, I want to thank everybody for welcoming me. I'm really so appreciative. Thank you so much, Renee, for having me today. And if you get a chance, again, Boca by Moonlight, I would love you guys to become fans and readers. I think you'll really enjoy it. You can always connect with me at bradgraber.com. That's my email address. Or you can go to bradgraber.com, go to my website, and please join my blog. There I said it. Sign up, become a subscriber. If you don't like it, you can unsubscribe too. No hard feelings. I would love to see you there. And thank you guys so much for being with me tonight. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to next time we get together. Thank you all. Bye-bye.